Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we've got yet more to do with the Tamiya Bullhead. We're gonna paint it, or rather we're gonna look at the stages of the paint. The first thing to do of course is remove all the bright work from the body. It's just a bunch of self-tappers and a few nuts, so we can just skip right past it. This video is about paint. Right, well, I say it's about paint, but preparation comes first. I'm going to replace the front square lights with round 3D printed ones. They have a central large LED and 7 smaller ones. Once the electronics are up and running, they will be individually controlled so we can do some funky animations with them. For now though, we've got a bit of a round peg in a square hole scenario. The good thing though with making things using a 3D printer, and more specifically using CAD, is it's really easy to make templates. So I've just printed up a template that fits on the front of the body and shows us exactly what we need to cut away. Next, because we're using magnetic body mounts, we don't need the old post holes in the wings. I'm tempted to just whack some isopon or Bondo in there, but that stuff really doesn't stick all that well to plastic. So what we really need is something else to bridge the gap. Also, it's going to help quite a bit if we slightly bevel the edges of the hole so the filler can make a good plug once it's hardened up. So we can fill it, we need to cover the hole on the outside with some masking tape. That way, when we fill from the inside, we should end up with an almost perfect surface straight away. To fill the holes, I'm going to use some 2-part epoxy. This is 5-minute, which isn't ideal. A 12-hour would be better to give it chance for the bubbles to rise to the top. But this is all I've got on hand right now, so it's going to have to do. We need to mix some up. Remember, always mix up a bit more than you think you're going to need. Then carefully pop a couple of drops in each hole. We need to prop the front of the body up so the holes are somewhere near level, then leave it to harden. Now, while this is 5-minute epoxy, I'm still going to leave it overnight just to make sure it's 100% set before we start fiddling around with it. Right, so it's the next day and the epoxy is as hard as it's going to get. I've also cheated a bit and trimmed up the holes for the front lights. It was just a quick buzz with a sanding drum on the Dremel. The important thing is with the templates, the new lights should be a perfect fit. And after a bit of fiddling, it pops in. It's a bit tight, but that's not a bad thing. We're only going to fit them once, well, twice, as we still need to glue them in next. For glue, I'm going to use a medium CA. We can run some around the edge of the round bit and add some to the flat bit before fitting. The glue is going to spread around all by itself when we press the part in. The part is sized up so it will stick out the front by roughly 0.4 millimeters, so we can then sand it flush. After 5 minutes the CA will have grabbed well enough that we can work on the other bits, but it's best to give it a few hours to fully harden up. While that's happening, we can peel up the masking tape and see how the post holes look. And surprisingly, we didn't get any bubbles on the surface, so I don't think we need to use any body filler at all. More often than not, you're going to get a couple of bubbles or some unevenness that a quick skim with some body filler will fix, but this time it's gone rather well. Before the first paint, make sure to give the body a good wash with soapy water followed by a good rinse, then leave to completely dry. From here on, we need to be nice and careful about finger grease and getting stuff on the body. We want to keep it nice and clean. I gave the epoxy on the wings a quick sand with some fairly light regular sandpaper just to bring the edges down, then applied a couple of coats of a high build primer around the epoxy and the headlights. Now, high build primer is essentially just like a normal primer, but it's a bit thicker, so it's going to fill any slight imperfections. Once it's dry, the next step is to wet sand all the things to get rid of any lumps and bumps. On the wings I was careful not to go through the primer, so we have a super smooth surface. Around the lights I used the primer to tell me when I'd sanded the lights flush. As you take the surface down, you just need to keep going until all the primer has gone. Next we apply some grey plastic primer, initially just around the front to cover up the red high build. With it all one shade of grey, it's then quite easy to see if there's any imperfections left. If there is, we just wet sand again and re-prime, but as it goes, it's looking pretty good. More grey primer now to coat the rest of the body. This is where the mould lines will stand out, if there are any. Now this body wasn't too bad, just some very light ones down the back of the cab, but no one's going to see them when the roll bar goes back on, so I'm just going to leave them be. Next we start on the paint. Now I like to paint the inside of fancy bodies with a matte black so they look nice and neat. If it's going to get bashed around, I generally don't bother. That lot was painted fairly quickly. The grey primer and the black was all done in an afternoon, so before we go on to the next step we're going to need to let it harden up overnight. The next step is masking. Now we've painted the inside of the body and we don't want to get the outside paint inside. So all the holes, like the windows, are going to get masked up from the inside. Then the bottom of the body gets masked off so we don't get any overspray. Right, time for the reveal. I wanted a dark theme with this body, also taking some of the chassis colours with a bit of a 70s and 80s feel. So here we have the body with its paint. Also, I wanted to use up some of the leftover paints I've got, and this seemed like a good way to use the dregs out of all the cans. It looks a bit stark at the moment, but once all the bright work goes back on, I think it's going to make sense. But that's not quite yet though, we've got some more paint to do, or rather lacquer. We'll need to carefully wet sand any blobs of black paint that you almost always end up with from rattle cans, being very gentle so we don't burn through the paint. Then start layering up the clear lacquer. And there we go, one shiny body. It's got a bit of orange peel to it, but I'm happy enough. It's had enough time to become handleable, but the lacquer isn't 100% hard yet. I find removing the masking while the lacquer's still just a little bit flexible makes for better edges. It might just be the brands I use, but when I leave them for a couple of days to harden and then peel, you get some very rough spiky edges along the tape. Now all the tape's off, we just need to let it harden up fully. A day will probably be good enough, but if you're not in a hurry, just leave it 2 or 3 days just to make sure, because it really won't hurt. By now, the paint is really tough, so we can go over it with some polish and a cloth, mainly just to cut back the haziness on the surface from the lacquer overspray. What tends to happen is by the time you're painting the back, the front's already started to dry, so you get the overspray on the surface. A quick rub down with a fairly light car paint polish and it all flattens out very easily though. Well, it's still got the orange peel to it, but without lots of work that's not going anywhere. And to be honest, from a distance it's perfectly acceptable, nice and shiny. Next step is to refit the brightwork, which I think really brings it all together. It's possibly just a little bit too shiny now though. I think we need to paint up the hoses that go from the airboxes into the engine bay, and perhaps the mounting and straps for the fuel tanks. That will bring the balance back down to earth a bit, I think. At the back we have the secret tail lights. Secret as in the holes have been there for the past few videos, but I've not mentioned them. There's 24 in total, and they're all individually controllable by the ARM processor on the blue PCB. The basics are working, but I'm still waiting for another PCB to be manufactured before the grand reveal. Hopefully it won't be long now though. Also, just in front we have another set of 5 holes that have been there for a while. Well, they're for this widget, which offers up from the inside, and takes one of those scale antennas that you can find on eBay. Also not shown, there's a drilling template that goes along with it specifically for the Bullhead. To fit it, we pop it on the inside, then screw in 4 M3 screws from the outside. The goal was to make it strong enough that if we do have a rollover, the spring on the antenna will take the strain and not damage anything. With a set of black screws, it's fairly unobtrusive. The only real giveaway is the end of the 20mm screw that sticks up in the middle. And of course, if I replace it with a black one, it wouldn't really notice at all. Then of course, we just thread the antenna on and nip it up finger tight. We will of course want to be able to remove it when transporting the truck, as it does add quite a bit of height to the already fairly tall truck. The question is though, now we've got a nice long antenna on the back, what should we do with it? Well, how about a dirty great skull and crossbones? Yeah, it's really a model boat flag, but I'm sure it'll manage. But that's going to have to wait for next time. I'm still very carefully eking out the content, so I can't put too much in this video. Well, with that being it for this week, all that's left to say is thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!